Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of old Irix software tutorials. Today we're going to be going through Maya, and the version we're going to use is the last one released for Irix, which is 6.5. Maya's been around for, let's see, 20 years now. It's just over 20 years. It was released in 1998, and has changed quite a bit in some ways, and in other ways it is fairly much the same program it was at Maya 1.0. You know, barring some features like features added throughout the years, the general navigation and workflow, the basic principle of it is the same. So if you follow this, you could probably open any other Maya and have be able to navigate your way around. Today in 6.5 we're going to cover some hotkeys and 3D view navigation, and I'll try to cover some things here about the user interface, and then we'll just go from there and see how long this gets. Alright, so when you first open Maya, you'll get, this is probably standard. You might have the channel box over here. Maybe you'll have this attribute editor over here, this little larger window, but usually you'll have one of these two and a 3D view. You'll have this, if it's the default setup that you have, you'll have these, the text menus up here, a little drop down here, a row of icons, which I'll get into later. There's a couple of tabs for what we call the shelves in Maya, and in this old, Maya 6.5, they don't have all the different features tabbed out like they do in the later editions. So you have a few little tools here. If you float over them, you'll get the tool tip. It's got a few primitives and some, here's a joint and IK and all this, cameras and particles to start, just quick things, which we'll get into that later. There's this little guy for editing the shelves. This drop-down menu is for modes, and in these text guys up here, file through window, these are the same, and everything after the window, these guys, they'll change depending on the mode you're in. So in modeling mode, you see all these, surfaces, NURBS, polygons, edit polygons, and if you switch this over from modeling to animation, you'll see that these six, file through window stay, but animate, deform, skeleton, all this changes depending on this. So here's the animation tools, modeling, there's dynamics and rendering, there's some other things there you can add. And then we have the tools over here on the left. This is like your move, rotate, and scale, and your selection tools, and there's like these two change depending on the last used tool or most used tool. And these guys over here are like switching views. So you got like a quad view. You can do the outliner, which is like your scene, scene content, and 3D view. There's a thing for animation, so you can look at the animation curves in the 3D view. What is this guy here? We got this looks like the Hypershade, probably. Yeah, you got a Hypershade in 3D view. But if you're using, like I'm using the, what is this, the 1600 SW monitor for the O2, you don't have a lot of room. Some of these things are, even in this early iteration of Maya, they weren't really, you could use them, but oftentimes you just float a window over another one because there's just not a lot of view space on a smaller monitor. But they're there, and we can get into that. I usually leave it with the outliner on the left, so you have like what's in your scene. It's like, a list of the items in the scene, and in your 3D view. Down here we got the timeline. The default is set to 24 frames. You could set this, usually I'll set this up to like, something like 120 or higher, just to give me some room when I start fiddling with animation. There's this little Mel command thing. We'll get into that maybe in another video. I don't know if we're going to do Mel commands in this one. This is a little feedback that'll tell you what's happening when you do tools. And then this guy down here is also like a tooltip. Got the channel box. Outliner shows up over here. These buttons up here will help you change them. These guys up here on the upper right. You can click this to hide it. Or you can click this to switch the attribute editor. They kind of do the same thing. The channel box and the they show you similar information, but the channel box is great for animating because you get a quick list of the stats here, and the attribute is like an expanded view where you can get into individual pieces of your object, whether the transform or the shape node or the shader all show up in the attribute editor in a more elegant way, so you can roll out more options, but when you're just animating quickly or doing some attribute changes, the channel box is like a brief, you know, it's like a quick breakdown list. So I leave it on channel box a lot until I have to get into some other features. All right, so let's go over some navigation first. So here's this 3D view. You have this grid. If you have the grid up, if you don't, I think you can go up and display and turn on off this grid here under the display. You know, this is gives us a perspective on the, you know, orientation of the world. If you look down here, you got your X, Y, and Z. So your Y is up, your X is like your side, and your Z is your forward and back. And you have this, so it's showing you how this is. So this is the Z, this is the X, and then your Y would be up and down here. And you can see it is oriented up and down. Now, let's start with navigation. So in order to move around this 3D view, you use the Alt key on the keyboard and mouse button combination. And I love this the best in Maya because it's the simplest to remember. With 3D Studio Max or Softimage, you had different keys pressed in different ways. And I like the Maya one the best because it's like Alt left click is your orbit. So you can see here if I use that, you know, it's orbiting around that center point because that's where the camera focus is right now. So that's our rotate. It does an orbit style too, so you'll see it doesn't want to bank. Like you can go around the center point, top over bottom, depending on your orientation towards the center. But you'll notice that like it doesn't bank, like this side doesn't turn up here or this side doesn't. And that's something that Lightwave and Moto do as an option. You can get apps to do that. Then you can even switch it on here in Maya, but I prefer this orbit style because it allows me to get around and make less camera moves to see something. So Alt left click for the orbit, rotate, you know, like rotating around. Alt middle mouse for the pan. So once you've rotated your camera and you want to pan left and right or up and down, it keeps your camera, you know, flush with whichever direction it is facing, and then you can move up and down and left and right to that with the Alt middle mouse click. And then the Dolly, which is pushing the camera in and out. It's not a zoom because a zoom will change your field of view, like the lens itself. The Dolly is the in and out, so it's Alt. And if you were in a newer version of Maya, it would be the Alt right click, which would be, you know, how they do it in future Mayas. But in the current, in 6.5, you use Alt left and middle mouse click, and if you drag, you'll get this Dolly. So it's like the camera's pushing forward or pushing back, so you move forward and back. So you got that Alt left, Alt middle, Alt left and middle. And it's easy to do this because it's only the Alt key to get you around the scene here. So that's how you get around the 3D navigation here. There's a couple other keys, which is A for Autosize and F for focus. If there's nothing in the scene, Autosize will just put you pressing the A. It will, you know, Autosize towards the center of the world because there's nothing else to focus on. And F does this too. F is focus, but F is useful when you have an item because it'll bring you into that, and we'll start with creating items. Now, in Maya, you have a lot of ways to create things here. So there's the menu up here when you're in animation or modeling, and we have create menu regardless of which set you're in. This create menu stays the same, and there's NURBs, polygons, subdivisions, volumes, like all these things for creating your items here. Another way, that's the break off the menu. That's a little feature here that you can do when you see this little line here. You can break the menu off and, you know, get to it this way if you don't want to keep going back up to it. Another thing is the HOTBOX, which is when you're over the 3D view, you can hold the space bar down and it brings up this like Uber menu, which has a lot of the menus that are in all of these up here, all the different ones here, they're all kind of put together in one group, and you can turn more or less on. You can show more or less stuff here. Let's see here, we can do hide all and oops, press that again. I'll have to show you that spacebar switch here. Went over to Hotbox controls and said hide all, and now I'll go over here and show all. And there's different ones you can turn it on and off if you know, using this option over here with the Hotbox controls. But I just leave it all on. Just leave it all on. Looks like I don't have cloth or some stuff I need to turn on. The plugins is grayed out here, so that's why that's gone. And so like that, if you want to create some primitives, you can go here, or you can spacebar click and you can see that same menu's here. And that's a quicker way, because if your mouse is over this, you don't have to come all the way up here. you're here and you just do a smaller move to get to this create. So I'm going to put a polygon plane, and it just drops that guy there. And now you'll see if I hit Autosize, now it's snapping it in there. It's put me all the way in because that's the item I had selected, or it was the only item in the scene for Autosize. Let's do create another object here. We'll spacebar, create polygon, or create a NURB sphere since it'll render smoother. We have the little sphere there, and let me move it over. And so now we'll get into the navigation keys here. So with the navigating the objects around the 3D view is with the move, rotate, and scale tool. And those hotkeys are, they're these up here, these icons, which I never use because I always use the hotkeys or the marquee menus that go with them. So the W key is the move tool. As you can see, it brings this little gimbal up here with some arrows. The E key is the rotate, brings up this gimbal here with all the little different axes, and then the R key is the scale. It kind of looks like the move tool, but it's got those little cubes on the end to separate it from direction versus, pulling on a axis here. So I'm going to use the move tool, press the W, and I'm going to grab this little X arrow here, and I'm going to pull this over and move this up. And now we have two items. And then you can click on an item. You can see that when you have items, you can click on an item and it will turn green, and you can click off an item to just deselect it. You can select, deselect, you can click on this item, select, deselect. What you can also do, you can see here I have a tool invoked, so that little square over the arrow is going because I still have the move tool going. So even though I don't have an object selected, when I select it, the move tool is still in play. And with next to the W and R on the keyboard is the Q, which you'll see it'll turn back into the select tool. So that's something I get into the habit of doing, is like, hitting the W tool to move, and I can hit deselect and I hit Q, and it returns me to the select tool. It's just a habit I get into so that I, am ensuring that I'm selecting something here. So now that we have both these items, holding the Alt key and the left click to rotate around. Now that I have both these items, you can see if I press the A for Autosize, it now doesn't go right to the center or the only object. It's trying to capture both items here. So I hit A, so Autosize. And then if I use the F key now, I have to have something selected. So I'll say hit F, it's kind of like the auto key. But now if I have something selected, I hit the F, it brings it in. That's fit or focus or find, one of those things. And this is a really nice way to get around Maya. So that's the main thing I wanted to show you with these button combinations. Is that you click an item, hit F, and you're looking right at the thing you want to modify. And this is really helpful in modeling. It also works with component mode when you switch from objects to the components, like you're going to modify vertexes or polygons or edges or even NURB control points. You can select a certain amount and focus in on those. And that will allow you to maneuver around the 3D view really elegantly. Okay, so the next thing we do is we're going to switch out of wireframe mode here. So there are 3 hotkeys for that. In the wireframe mode, it's 4. And if you want to see shaded, you press 5, and you'll see it switches over here. The SGI doing the magic hardware capability it had before everybody had OpenGL cards in the PC world. This was something exclusive to SGI. So there's these guys, and then there's another one which is 6, which is the texture view, which we'll get into later. But if you press 6 and I had I put a JPEG texture on this square here, if I hit press 6 and it was mapped right, you'd see the wood texture on it, and we'll show that. We'll get into that in a little while. So, but let's scale this up. Let's make a little scene here. So I'm going to click with the select tool, holding hit Q for the select and click that guy, and then I'm going to hit the R key for scale. I'm going to scale this up. Now, if you grab the middle, it's doing uniform. If you grab the, one of these things, it's going to scale it. Obviously, if I grab the Y, because it's a flat item, it's not going to scale. It'll scale numerically like I do this, and you can see that the scale went up, but because it's a flat item, it hasn't really made any difference in it. So let me undo that. See, that goes back here. So, and I can scale this way. Now I have the channel box open, so I wanted to show you some neat tricks about it. So you could scale over, you could go over here and go, okay, I want this to be in the X, hit 20, hit enter, and you see it scaled up. And you go, okay, on the Z, I also want it to be 20, and it scales up. But you can also, instead of just one number at a time, you can select across numbers in Maya. You can do this with objects. Like you can, any of the menus, there's ways to select across multiple things by dragging. So instead of just going 20, tab, enter, tab, enter, and going through this and going 20, and then hitting enter, and then let's see if I tab to the next one, 20, 20, enter, and then I could tab to the next one and 20, enter. You could get through it that way, but in Maya you can actually drag across all of them. So if I left click and hold down, when I first do the first click, like hold down left click and then I just drag down, you'll see it gets across multiple numeric values. Now I know the grid is 24 units, so let's say I just want to make it the same as the grid. So now I press 24 once and enter, and it enters it across all 3 items. And this is a pretty neat little feature when you're trying to like zero things out to their default position, or you just want to change a few things all at once. Let's see, there's another feature of the channel box which makes it so the entry, which you can't do in the attribute editor. Like let's go over to the attribute editor, I'll show you the elegant, the longer display of something. So this is showing you kind of the same stuff that the channel box is, but it's a lot more information. So here I've got the plane, here I've got the NURB sphere, and you can see when you do this, like, whoa, look at all these tabs. I've got this, and it says plane 1, and that says plane shape, and it says polyplane. It's like, well, is that redundant? That's because each item in Maya is made up of a few different components. So it's a few different pieces going into each thing, and it involves like construction history too. So in every item in Maya, you have 3 main things, which is, let's go here, we'll go here to the hypergraph. Yeah, I'll show the hypergraph here. And it's showing me here, I've got this plane. Let's try to map this out here. Okay, so I mapped out the plane. You see, like, here's a shading group. This is the plane here, which it was what it shows here. And then you got this plane shape, and then you have this polyplane. These are 3 different things. So the first one that you see in the outliner and you see in the attribute editor, this is actually not the item itself, but the transform, and the transform gets named to the item. The transform, all the transform is where it is in 3D space. So when you move something around, it's just this little point where it is in 3D space. Let's see if we rotate it here. You can see here in the channel box, I got 30 degrees, and that's got the incremental rotate turned on. The transform is just where it is in 3D space. So this is something that doesn't even need an object. Like when you make a group, it's basically an item created as like a group that has a shape node underneath it. And the shape node, which is the next item, this is the geometry. This is either polygons, NURBs, subdivisions. It's the thing that you see. It's the 3D item. That's the shape node. And you'll see here in the first one, you click it, it says transform, and it has the name of the transform. And then you hit the shape node, and it says this is the mesh, whatever the mesh is. And there's all these options. Like there's even mental ray options here that are specific to mental ray. There's some render stats you can get to, like the visibility, ray visibility. And these pertain to the usage cases of the mesh. There's some displacement stuff. And this is tertiary things that you might need that you're going to deal with the mesh later. And finally, like this polyplane thing, this is the construction industry. So where did that go here? We got the hypergraph here. So when you first create an item in Maya, it's plugging a tool into it. And it's like, it didn't just give you a plane and then you're done. It gives you this history. And let me go back to the channel box. So you can see here, it's showing you a longer form version of the history. But let's go back to the channel box here, and you see that you have all this translation stuff, and there's the shape node, and then the input, which goes into the shape node. This is informing what the shape node should be shaped like, is the polyplane tool. And that's still live. So let's zero this out, and we'll rotate this flat again. And I'll turn off this grid, create or display grid. And you see here we got a 10 by 10. We have a 10 by 10 grid. I'll turn the Q, so I'm in select. And we can change that. And so even though we haven't deleted the history yet, so that item's, you can animate it and do whatever you want with it and leave that alone. But when you're, you know, for modeling, you're like, oh, maybe I don't want that many sections. Maybe I just want to extrude a very basic thing. So we'll go down here, drag across these two tens, subdivision width, subdivision height, and just press 1. And there we have one polygon, makes the whole plane. You can do something like maybe you want to sculpt this or shape it. Let's add 50 by 50. And you got all these polys that you can play with if you want to sculpt something, you know. It depends on your usage case, but that's that, and then all that gets plugged into later down the workflow into a shader group, and this is the thing that you attach a shader to. Normally they're default Maya shaders, but let's say you use mental ray. A mental ray shader would go in there, and that tells Maya that I want to attach this shader and to this piece of geometry that was your shape node. So your shape node will be colored with whatever shape goes into the shading group. And let's click that guy and see what's there. We'll click this and go. It's telling me it's got the default Lambert. And the NURBS shape that's also in here is also plugged into this initial shading group. This initial shading group is just the default one that Maya assigns to any object created before you assign a specific shader. So that's always in the scene at some point as a way to catch new geometry and shade it somehow. So that's it. So you always have to think of every item in Maya as a transform, which is where it is in 3D space. The shape node, which is the geometry. You can also switch it on here and display. You can hit shapes, and then suddenly you get these drop downs that say, you know, here's what they are. So here's the transform itself, and here's the shape node. And to kind of you know, give you an example, like I can delete with that turned on. I can delete the shape node. And that little transform's still there. There's nothing inside of it, but it's still there. But you learn how to use these things in cases of rigging and everything. So let's undo that using Control Z until we get back here, and we'll turn off these shape nodes. So there we go. All right, so let's get back into display modes here. So I've got these two items, and I've explained how you can use the input without deleting the history to change the geometry and what that is. So if we go now, let's say I'm happy with this one polygon plane. I'll go back to attribute editor. You see I got the transform, the shape node, and the input, and then the last thing is just the Lambert one shading group. I'm going to delete the history on this now, and you'll see that it just turns into these three items. So we'll go edit, delete by type, history, and now it is just literally, there's no more input. I can't change the amount of polygons now. It's not there. I have a transform, I have a mesh, and just the shading group, which has the Lambert plugged into it, default Lambert shader. And that's it. That's all the items in Maya are these three things. And if you add history or like things to it, like deformers, you're going to have those between the shape node and the shader. Like they'll happen. You'll get more and more tabs depending on the amount of like history. Like you do like a deformer, like a bend, and then you can do like a lattice deformer on top of that, and it'll be another tab between your shape node and your shader node. Okay, so that's kind of the general gist of the objects and the structures of the objects. And you would switch between like attribute editor to look at all these things, like I'm looking at the shader here. You can see like there's all these options in each one, or if I want to go to the mesh and change the meshes, this is what you get to the attribute editor for. And you go back to the channel box to see, you know, a quick breakdown of the list of things, and you can see that polyplane is not there because I've deleted the history, so it's just the shape node left over. All right, so let's see. Let's maneuver around and let's do some more. Let's do some more things here so to understand the tools. So I'm going to go over here to shading, and this is something I do in Subdivision. There's this one down here called Wireframe Unshaded, and I like turning that on because it'll show you the, you know, like even if though it's shaded, you can see the geometry on top of the shaded mode. I tend to like this view a lot. Let's see here, I'll delete this guy. We'll create another plane, create spacebar, create polygon plane, and I'll scale that up to, what is that, 24 we had before. I'll leave those there, and you can see there's with the wireframe on, you can see all the whole grid here. Okay, let's create a couple more items. Now let's scale this guy up. Click this, press R for scale, scale it up, and then I'm like, I want to put that on the floor. In a 3D view, you can, you know, turn it sideways here, hit the move key, and kind of, you know, check out how close you have it to the floor. But there's another little trick you can do. You can do switching between the views like I did over here. You can switch to this and then move it this way and then switch back to where we were. But there's this, if you, as you saw before, like if you press the space bar, it brings up the hotbox. That's just press and holding. But if you tap the space bar, it'll switch to the 4 view. Oops, so I got to use the 4 view initially. So I've got this here, and I can press the space bar. So if I had this here in this mode that I started from the 4 view, I can tap and press the space bar. Now it brings me to the 4 view. Now I can go down here. If I float this, you know, the cursor over one of these views and just press space bar, it'll give me that view. You know, and this is a way of, you know, navigating quickly. You go, oh, I want to put that on the floor, space bar out, move it over perspective, space bar in. And so you got this. All right, let's go back to our outliner view. See if I can go back and forth between those two. Can I do that? And it doesn't like that outliner view with the 4. Anyway, so that's a way of navigating around. It's, you know, because I turned on the outliner view, it's switching back to the main view instead of the 4 view here, and then adding the outliner to it. All right, let's look at some other functions. Let's create some more geometry here, and I'll show you some other things that can happen. We'll go create, spacebar create, polygon cube, brings that guy up, press the R to scale, scale that guy up, press the spacebar, press the 4 view, press the W key, put this guy up on the floor. Here, I'll scale it up a little bit, R, W, move that up, press F to focus. Here, I'll move that back and just kind of set it down on the ground. Real quick, space bar in there. Okay, so now I've got my 2 views, and move this guy. Now, one thing you can do that's pretty neat with the move tool is, you know, I can press the W and I can use this X and the Z. One thing you can do is you can lock the movement to one of the axes, so you don't have to do this X and Z thing, or you know, whichever axes you're not using. So Alt back over here. So if I want to, like, I've set that on the floor, but I want to scoot it along the floor without going click, 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 like click, 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 you know, and I go, oh, I want to put this over here. You can do is you can use the Alt key and lock it to the axis that you're not using. So if I want to do the X and Z axis, I can press Alt and click on the Y, and it'll lock it to the X and Z. So let's see, let's hit this guy here. Or no, sorry, excuse me, Control. Sorry, Control and the axis that you're not using. And you'll see here that now it's moving it on X and Z, but it's not moving it up and down on Y. So this is pretty handy, so you can kind of slide it along a surface. Like if I had a wall on this side here, I could slide it along the wall. Like let's say I had lined it up with the edge here, and then I want to slide it up the wall. I could hit the Control and now lock it to the X and Y, or Z and Y, by clicking Control on the one I'm not using, which is the X. So now I'm moving it up and down. You can see here it stays there. It's not moving anywhere on X. I've locked it using the Control key on the axis that I want to lock. It's a little handy little feature that I use all the time. In the newer Mayas, there's the Gimble have these little floating squares and that you can use to do that, but it's always been in here. You can use the Control click to be able to do that. All right, let's do something. Let's see what else I can show you here with the channel box and some other things here. Let's create one more item. We'll do create polygons. Let's see, create subdivision. Should we create a torus? Yeah, I'll create a torus. All right, so I've made this torus, and now in this version of Maya, subdivision and polygons are different things. In the newer versions of Maya, you can take a polygon item and hit the 3 key, and it basically turns it into a subdivision surface automatically. But at this point in Maya's evolution, that hadn't been featured yet, and so they have these things where there's subdivision, which is kind of a middle ground between polygon and NURBS usage. It's like you model with the polygon sensibility, but you want to get the smoothness of a NURBS, you know, surface that gives you this really perfectly smooth thing to shade, so you don't have all the faceting that the polygons would have. Even if you have high resolution of polygons, a very high polygon count to smooth something out, it's still like faceted until they added this feature where polygons can become subdivision. But in this Maya, we have these subdivisions. The W key to move this up, hit the E key to rotate it. Oh, also, if you want to rotate off any of the axes, you can click in the middle here to get these guys to move around, kind of like a gimbal. It's a little bit of a quicker function. All right, so hit the E. We'll scale this guy up here, and you'll see here that I have this torus, and it looks like polygons. But if that's the mode. So if you press the 1 key, that's like subdivision display smoothness 1, which is its default. If you press 2, it moves it up 1 level. If you press 3, it goes further. And so there's 1, 2, and 3, and it's like different levels of subdivision. And this is what in newer Mayas you would do with a polygon object. You start with a polygon. If I had a polygon cube and I press 3, you see it does nothing here. It says display smoothness 3 and does nothing because it's a polygon. But in the newer Mayas, that cube would be would round out like this, like a sphere, the same way that this torus is doing. And in this version of Maya, the torus is like, the subdivisions mode is like the halfway point between the NURBs and the polygons. You can, if you want, if you model something in polygons and you want to create something like that, you can convert it still. So we'll take this cube. I think it's Control D to duplicate, but let's look. Duplicate, yeah, Control D. So I hit Control D, and then I've made myself another cube. I'll pull this guy out, and then I'll go over here to modify, and we can go convert polygon to subdivision. So we do that, and it's created it. And you can see here, it's made this thing. And now if I hit 1, now it kind of gave it more geometry. I guess it probably because of the default settings. Let me see if it will do another conversion here. Control D, move it over. Okay, I've got this cube. And let's see what the options are. Modify, convert, polygon to subdivision options. And it says proxy options. There's standard object with no history. Keep the original. Don't keep the original. Let's see if we can create. Yeah, it's created this subdivision. It's subdivided it once, even though the display level says 0. But you can see here that as a polygon, even if you kept it as 4 polygons, it would convert. It's by 1 subdivision, it's made each face becomes 4, and so it's done that. And you hit the 2 key and the 3 key, and it does this. And so if you still want a polygon model the traditional way, even by modern standards, in these older Mayas, and have it act like a subdivision, you can still convert a polygon to a subdivision and get the same result, even though here it seems to have melted down at like 1 subdivision layer. All right, so that's just to kind of cover some general understanding of these 3 different geometry types, but let's get into the navigation tools again. So let's go back to the Move, Rotate, and Scale tool first. So we got this WER again, and you'll notice that this torus that I've rotated and moved, that in the Move tool, I've moved it, and it's still up and down, but when I rotate, the Rotate tool seems oriented to the angle. And this is significant to the tool case usage. So you will want local and world at different times. And what I mean by local and world is the orientation of the gimbal. So right here, let's go back to the Move tool. You'll see that this is oriented to the world and not the object. And you can go up here to this, between these 3 icons here. The one in the middle is the tool settings. So we can hit that. Breaks this open. It says, yeah, see, it's set to world. And you can set this to object, and you see that, wow, now it's set to the object. If I hit F and focus on that, there it is. You can see that, and you can switch back to world or local. And normals are really more helpful for when you're doing polygon objects. When you're doing like modeling with in component mode, which I'll show you in a little while, that pertains to this here up here. This is like the object mode, and when you switch to component, it turns blue, and that's when you're messing with the individual pieces of the shape, the shape node, like polygons or NURBs or something like that. Switch that back, so you can switch your Move tool settings and your Rotate settings and your Scale settings based on those things later. But what I wanted to show you is usually you won't use this. Sometimes you will, because you'll set up some things here, like I have that snap rotate turned on. But I usually never use this because I use the marking menu. So let's go back to the channel box here. And the thing that's great about the marking menus is they're quick ways to get to those without having to fiddle around with the UI too much. So the marking menus for these move, rotate, and scale are inside the move, rotate, and scale, meaning that if you hit the W and you're in the move tool, you want to access the marking menu for it. You hold down W like a sticky key, and then you hold down the left click, and you'll see this marking menu comes up. And you have these same options that you just saw in that tool setting window, only now that's just floating here over your object. So now I can switch to the world view, the world orientation, and I go, okay, go back to object, hit W, go back to the object. And this is way more convenient, you know. So it's like, let's try to move this cube around here. I'll click this guy, move it up, and then let's rotate it. And I go, okay, I want to rotate it here and here. And now I say move, and it's moving like, oh, but I don't want to move it there. I like the orientation, but I want to move it up and down. Hit W, left click, switch to world. Now I can still move it up and down. I like it here. And I was like, okay, let's say I want to move it on this direction here. Well, W, object, and then you can do this and switch. And there you go. Oh, I like this orientation, but I don't want to, you know, I want to rotate it now on the world and not the local. So I like the angle. I just want to aim this point towards this way based on the world. So hold the E key now, because it's the rotate tool. Instead of holding down the W key and you're changing the rotate tool options, hold down the E key and the left click, and you got the rotate options here. So let's switch that to global, and now I can rotate this, you know, on the flat plane of the world, aim it how I want, even though I like that angle that it's dipped. And then I can go, okay, I want to reorient it this way on the local again. Hold the E key, hit left, go up to local. Now I can reorient like this here. And so this is a quick way to get, not be stuck in Maya, you know, like if you're animating, you're doing things, and then you rotate off, and you're like, whoa, I don't want to be, you know, stuck in this, so I want to go up and down directly. Hit the W key, hit world. Yeah, well, you can switch back and forth, and it should give you enough options to get to where you need to be without thinking that you're kind of stuck just because of the tool limitations. You have the ability to switch back and forth to whichever orientation you need really quickly. All right, so that covers that. Let's see what else we can do. I can show you how the channel box versus the attribute editor changes across multiple items. So I've got this poly to subdivision sphere, which I made from the cube. Which is cube. Let's go back to the transform on that, and then I've got the torus. Got this transform. You can see here, I can shift click this, and it gives me this cube, like, you know, the last item selected in the attribute editor. But let's see if I switch this translate here. If I go 0, enter, you see it's only affecting the cube, even though I have the torus selected. So I'll undo that. And that's because the attribute editor will only change the last selected thing. It's very specific to the last selection. But if we're in the channel box, you can change attributes across multiple items, and this even includes things that they have similar. Like if I had 2 shape nodes that had similar attributes, the channel box will try to reach across both items and change them uniformly. And this can be helpful in many different circumstances. So let's see here, if I duplicate, let's see what else. Say I want like to orient this cube and this NURB sphere to the same orientation that torus has. So I'm left clicking that guy, shift left clicking this guy, and then shift left clicking the torus last, because I want to match them to the torus. So one thing I could just show you is that if you just take, and let's select all these guys, and we'll just do 45, and it blah, and you see they all change to 45, right? Like that was across all the items now, because I use the channel box with all of them selected. I'm going to undo that, and I say, okay, we want to change this and shift this and then shift that last, so we can change these two into this. What you can do is you go click on the rotate X, and when you hit tab, it's basically entering that entry across everything. And since this entry is showing is the last one there, it's going to use this one to apply it to these two. So we'll hit, click that 20 and hit tab. See, they both moved, but the torus didn't. Now I'll hit tab again. They both moved, and then hit tab again for the rotate Z. And so now these all are oriented exactly like this torus that was the last selected. You know, it's like, okay, now I want them all to orient to this guy. Shift, shift click, and then this is the last one that'll put the information in up there in the channel box. Shift click. Like, okay, let's orient it to this. Tab, tab, tab. You know, and this could be useful too. Like if you have a big scene, like you have this guy way out here, you know, somewhere up here, and let's like create a light. Spacebar, create, go down to lights, create an area light here. And we know we just kind of want the area light up where this is. You know, it's like, so have that, shift left click that guy, and I'm just going to tab through, and it should put the area light over there. Tab, 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 and you see the area lights in this general vicinity here. And so that can be helpful if you have certain items and you create them, and or you import an item into the world from like another 3D application, and you've got an area your camera's focused on. You can, you know, click that item in the outliner, then shift click the item where you want it to be, and then tab through, and it'll like wherever it is imported, it'll snap over to your the last item you have selected. So let's see, move this guy down here, 0, zeroed that out, put this back up. Let's not hit the F key. Orientation, reorient it here, across those, 0. Hit this. Hit the control key on the Y to slide it along. Hit the space bar to bring up foreview. Space bar here, and I can put this up on the floor. Space bar, space bar. And you can see here that it starts to become elegant. The more you get used to the navigation here, you can just jump around and get things to move and snap to and orient to things pretty easy when you understand how some of these features work together. All right, let's open up the outliner over here. So press this little key here so we can get our scene view. Let me see, we've got some items, area light, some polygons, subdivision, and a NURBS item. And we have these cameras. These guys are the 4 views that you saw in the foreview. Like I'm using the perspective to navigate around, and you got your top, front, and side. These are always in the scene. You can't delete these guys. You can animate with any of them if you want, and render through any of them if you want. But usually what you do is you would create an actual camera that's just in the scene. You can see here these ones are blue because they're hidden, and the black items are unhidden. And you can hide and unhide items in Maya. So let's say if we wanted to go to the NURB sphere here and hide it, you could hit Control H, and it disappears. And you can see here the NURB sphere is now blue. And then you can unhide it. You should be able to hide it with Shift H, I think. Yeah, okay. In Maya 6.5 you can. Earlier Mayas they didn't quite have that hotkey put in place, but Shift H will unhide and Control H will hide. And so you can you can keyframe that, you can animate with that, or you can get stuff out of your way if you're modeling, you got other items around, you can hide and unhide. There's a lot of places where you can do this. There's this visibility here in the channel box that you can turn on, and that's what the hotkey's doing. You see it still does the same thing. There's also like creating display layers, which is where it gets confusing, because if you make a display layer out of something and you hide it, it doesn't reflect it here in the channel or in the outliner. So let's say I wanted to make a display layer out of the floor. So I go layer down here and I go create layer, and I could rename it, you know, double click that guy and say, okay, this is the floor, and we'll make it like red to color code it. Say, so we got the floor, it's got this V here, click off of it. You can switch modes here, like to, this would be a template. If you turn it into template, you can't really mess with it. Oh, sorry, reference, excuse me. Well, I guess you can here. Oh wait, I didn't add it, sorry. I should have done that. Add selected object. Okay, here we go. So turn that T, you see a template, it kind of turns it into a kind of a wireframe ghosted view of it, and then if I hit the R, make it a reference object. Now when it's a reference object, you see it, but you can't select it. And this is kind of neat if you're working on like an interior of a house. You can grab the whole house item when you're putting tables and chairs in it, grab the whole thing and putting it in a display layer, and then you can make it a reference, and then it's there. Oh, here, if you turn it off, you can see that the color that I gave it, if you turn off those modes, the color I gave it shows up. So I can make it green, This is just to color code stuff so you can see if you want to put things in different areas and see what it's doing there. It was color coding the wireframe here. But this is handy so if you have a whole house of stuff and then you're putting tables and items in and you don't want to, like, you're like, oh, I'm grabbing this, and then you end up grabbing the floor and you're gonna have to like deselect whatever. If you have this in a display layer, you can go in here and double click from template to reference, and then if I click off it, you can see here I can't grab it anymore. You know, so that's pretty handy because now I can just mess with the items that are in the room or the tables, and I don't have to worry about grabbing something that is a reference layer, and you know, until I turn that on or off. But this is also, like I said, if you use the V, which is the visibility, that floor disappeared because it's in this display layer, but it doesn't reflect it here. So you see this plane, it's like, it's not blue. So you can like Control H to hide it, and then Shift H to unhide it, but it still doesn't show up. There's no indicator for that in the UI. You have to keep that in mind if you want to use display layers. Saw that. Anyway, I'll right click, delete this guy, and it returns to normal. All right, let's get into some polygon, let's get into some modeling things so we can get into this object versus component mode here. So let's do some items here. So we got this. Which one I want? I'll delete that one. I'll keep the torus. This guy and this guy. We'll orient them flat. So I'll go over here to the rotation, hit 0 across. They're all flat. F. Maybe I'll put the torus a little sideways here. Put that down on the floor. Let's see here. Put this guy down on the floor. Hit the W key here. All right. Oh yeah, one thing I could show you, I guess I got to show you snaps. I want to show you some snaps here, and that's relevant for both modeling and animation. So let's see if I do this. I hit Control D to duplicate this guy. We'll move this guy out. Let's say I was making a door. Okay, this is significant to the transform part of an object. So the center of the object where the gimbal is that's the pivot point. Let's go over here to the attribute editor here. You'll see over here there's like the transform, the shape node, like I showed you before. Under the transform, you have like where it is and everything, but then there's this little option here called pivots, and it's showing you that like in local space, this thing's right in the center of the object. In the world space, it's recording that based on the world point, it's over here. It's reflecting that. And it should be a mirror of what you have here if it's centered out. If it's not in the center of the object, it'll reflect that it's not center here, and it's basically a mathematical inverse of what you see here to show you where the pivot point is. And then I want to show you how to modify that pivot point, and also how to use snaps to move that pivot point in a little bit more of a precise way based on the geometry. So what we can do, the reason why we'd want to move a pivot point is because maybe you want something to rotate different than the default position that Maya gives you. Like in this sphere, it's in the middle here. And all the items, it's usually right in the dead center, and you can reset it with a thing here called under modify with center pivot. If you get it out of the pivot, you want to return it, you can center pivot. Or let's say you delete some geometry and it's a new shape and you want to recenter it, you modify center pivot, it'll move it to the center of the item again. But let's say we want to make a door. So we have this cube here. I'll hit the E or the R key for scale. I'm going to scale this guy flat. This could be technically like a door, but when I rotate, it's not rotating on the end. We want it to rotate on the side over here. So the way to modify the pivot, there's two ways to do it. One's a sticky key, and the other one just turns it on and off. If you hold the D key down, you'll see that all on the move tool, the D key takes the heads off here, and it takes that center point and puts a circle on it. And this is letting you know it's in the modify mode while you hold the D key down. And so I can move this X over here, I can slide it over here, and then I let that go, and now that pivot's been moved. You should see it over here. So now it's got a new pivot space. It's over here. But now if I use the rotate, now it's more like it's swinging like a door. And so you do that with holding the D key. You can do this. But if you don't want to hold it down, you can also hit the insert key. Just tap the insert key, and it kind of puts it in this modify mode. And then when you're finished, you can tap the insert key again, and it pops it back out. Now, one thing you may want to do is when you want to move your gimbal, you may want to base it on exact points in the geometry, like, you know, like this floor has these intersections here, and this one has, it's just a whole six-sided shape for a door. We want to put it right against these verts here. So what I'll do is when I hold the D key, I can combine it with, and that's what these icons up here are, these snap tools. And there's a X snap. You see when you turn on the snaps, it turns from a square to a circle. If you use the X, you'll see that's turning on the grid snap. If you use the C, that turns on the curve snap. I don't have any curves in the scene. If I made some curves, I could make it snap, and then I could drag it, and it would follow a curve just because the snap tool is turned on. And then there's this here, which is the snap to points or vertices. And that's what we're going to use here. If you hold the V key down, that's one. So you could do this when you're moving too. Like if I use the V key and I like middle mouse drag this guy, you'll see it's going to try to snap. Whenever I point at a vert, it's going to go towards it. Like it could be any vert in the scene. So it's like snapping. It's a precise way of getting geometry to move and snap to things. I use this a lot I use it even in the modeling when we're in component mode. But we're going to move the pivot point this way, not just the object. So I'm going to hold the D key down, then I'm going to hold the V key down. So I'm using a, you know, move the pivot point, hot, you know, sticky key, and the snap. So the D and the V are being held down like sticky key to both move the pivot and snap the pivot. I'm going to middle mouse on the X. I'm going to move it over here to this edge, like one of those verts, and then let them both go. Something turned it back on, so let's turn these back off manually. Hey, what's going on here? All right, turned it off. So you can see here, I've moved that, you know, like I'll hold D, I'll move it again, and I'll hold D and V, middle mouse drag, and there it is snapping because I moved it to like any of these points. It snapped to the edge. I'll let them go. Oh, it's turning that, invoking that. I gotta figure this out. What's going on here? So I move this, middle mouse drag to this thing. All right. It's, for some reason it turned something on, but you can see I snapped the pivot to the end there, and then I hold the E key, and I've got this swiveling on the end. So that's pretty useful to know when you want to change an item's center of rotation, because there's gonna be usage cases where you're gonna want to do that. You're not gonna want to rotate right in the center. You know, like there's probably ideas that you can have for animation like that. Like let's say I move this to on the cube here. Say I move this cube from the center, hold the D and the V, I want to move it, I'll middle mouse drag this to this edge here, and then I'll D and V and I'll middle mouse the Y down to this edge, and then if I hit the E, you know, it's like right on that ledge, and it's like I could make a cube of that, and then I could animate the pivot. If I wanted to, I could animate that, and then I could use keyframes on the pivot point, and then move the pivot here, and then do another rotation, and so you could go to tunk, move the pivot to tunk, you know, you could do a lot of different tricks, just, you know, knowing how these functions work together to make some neat motion and effects and everything. All right, let's see. So we've covered those moving things. Let's get into component modification. So the move, rotate, and scale as it pertains to components. And what we'll do is let me go, did I delete? I left this alone. I'll model this as like just like a little lighting section here. So I've got this plane. It still has the history on it. Since I recreated a new one from the one I deleted before, I'll go over here to the channel box, and we'll do we got the polyplane history here in the channel box. I'll hit this, and I'm just going to bring this down to 1. And what we'll do is we'll switch over. We'll switch over to like modeling mode, which is the component and object. So you can change an item, not just animating, but change the components on the shape node. So let me go down to polycube here. Let me put this at like these subdivision width, height, and depth. I'll make this like 6. So get a lot of squares here. Hit F over here and focus in on it. All right, so now if I want to modify this cube, say I want to punch a hole in it here and then make that hole round, and we'll get into this part of the modeling here. So to switch over, I mean, there's this button up here, which is the change of the component type, and now you see I've got verts and all this. And plus when I did it, when I switched to object here up there, these two buttons here, these little icons, they change. Like I've got this is like turning these off and off, allowing you to select an item or not. Like say you had like a rig and some particles and some curves and all this stuff happening in a closed area. You go, well, I just want to select the polygon, so I could turn all these off when I'm in the object mode here. And I could turn off all these other things I don't want to select, and then I'm only grabbing the polygons. You know, I'm only grabbing geometry. You'll see if I switch this off, and now can't switch anything. I can select off it, but I can't select anything. This is just a way to filter your selection, and usually I don't touch any of these. Usually these guys just stay on, and they're just always on. I don't mess with it. And then you can go, I'm just showing you that this button is, you know, between object and component. So you're switching now. It's like I can get verts, or I could select, you know, edges and faces. But we should use, instead of all this, like telling it, hey, select this, or select edges, or select polygons, you know, like this lets me select polygons, and this lets me select edges. You know, instead of doing that, let's use the marking menu. So instead of even messing with any of that, I would use the marking menu. And the marking menu for switching from object and component is just holding the right key, the right click on the mouse. You don't have to use any keyboard. And you see here I've got object mode, edge, face, vertex, and this is a quick way to switch between. So let's right click over the item, go to object mode, and you see I can click on it, and I'm back to that green. And the green mode is telling you this is, you're animating this object, you're moving it on its pivot in world space for the sake of where it is for animation. If you right click and you say go to faces, you can see that the mesh turns blue, and it's Maya is letting you know, hey, you want to modify the shape node. You're not just moving the transform around and messing with the transform pivot point, but you're now in the shape mode modification here. And so like now we can do the move, rotate, and scale tool like we were before, only now we're actually changing the shape of the item, you know, and click this, go here, click this guy, hit the rotate tool here, you know, and, you know, to make whatever shape or item thing that you're trying to create in Maya, you know, whatever complex object you're trying to get to, you can modify for. But what's great is that these tools, like I showed you before, like the move, rotate, and scale, they apply, those same things apply to modifying an item, like a component. Let's try to say we're going to cut a hole in the side of the box here, and we're going to use like another shape to use the snap, so I can create this in a round way. So let's see, we want to cut this hole, we'll make it 8-sided, so we'll go to face, hold the right click over the object so it puts it in component mode, click the 4 squares, shift click to select them, we'll hit delete. Oh, well, back selected here, got to be careful of that. Selecting through, there should be, see here if they have camera select through. If I hold the Q, yeah, it doesn't have select by, see if it's in the tools here. Select tool. No, they don't have the keep selection by camera only, so you're gonna have to watch your selection through the back. And I guess the way to check on that is to hit the 4 key and check. Yeah, so you have to be careful about those back selections. I use the drag, so if you use the, like when I'm selecting, if you use the control key with the left click on the select tool, you can drag select. You can do that for adding things, or, you know, control shift adds, and just control by self drag removes. And so you're going to have to watch that selecting the back faces. So I'm trying to shift click these guys, shift left click to grab these guys, and I hit 4 and I could see, did I select any of the back? Okay, I didn't. But if I did, I could see it, and then I would control drag through and try to deselect. Let's see, hit 5. Okay, so we've got these 4 polygons. I'm going to delete those guys. We've got this opening. Now if I wanted to round out this cube by subdividing it, like smooth meshing it, which is what I would do to make it like shiny and round, this would be, it wouldn't be perfectly round like a perfectly round opening. It would be, it would kind of round out here and here, but it wouldn't be, it would be kind of like a roundy square, like a roundy cube opening, just the same way the outside is. And let's check it out. If we go to modeling, so I'm in modeling mode, Let's go to polygons and we'll just use the smooth. It's right here. Turn that on and it kind of makes this. Oh, it didn't make the inside round. Interesting. It does not even have that in this Maya. Okay, let's see what we have here for. Go to my attribute editor. Now that's added history. So I've got my polycube shape and I've got the history now. It's got the subdivision levels and it should show up in channel box too. So I've got, see, I've got the cube. I deleted a component, part of history, and I got a poly smooth face. Probably showing up in the hypergraph. Let's see what it shows here. Hit this guy. Yeah, so I've got the cube, the history still turned on, the transforms there, delete a component, and a poly smooth face. So you can see here all these history pieces of these tools have been plugged in between this to get to the shape node's final shape. So I'll leave those alone right now. Well, this isn't rounding it out. It's not rounding out because I guess it doesn't do it with these hard edges. Keep hard edge off is even off. Let's see here, smooth UV's on. Let's see. So let's see, I've got divisions. Let's see if I chose 2 instead of 1. It's going to try another layer, you know, and see it's smoothing it out. Let's do 3, see what it does here, how smooth it gets. 3. It's going to take it a second to catch up, but it's pretty smooth, you know. It's kind of slowing me down a little bit, but pretty nice shape. But we've got this really square interior, but we want to round that out and add like a little tube to it. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to undo all the way back to before I tried to smooth mesh it once. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to use a cylinder and line it up to this, and then use that to be our guide for making this a round thing, and then we'll extrude it out, make it a little bit or organic tube coming off that, like robotic thing or something. So I'll go here, I'll space, create polygon primitives, we'll do a cylinder, and it's already set up. It looks like the last time I used it, it was already 8-sided. Control this, and let's go here in the history. So it already has 8. Like I can switch this to 16, it'd have 16. You know, you could make like the subdivision height 2 or 3. Let's see what we got here. Move this up. Yeah, it's adding that. See if I put 4, you'll see 4 bars on the height. 4 sections. Pretty neat. I only need 1, just showing you how this works. And then what we're gonna do is, because this has 8 sides, the opening has 8 sides. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're gonna make this 8 so we can line those things up with this. All right, so now here's where snapping comes in handy, so we can line things up really accurately, even in a 3D view without having to switch to orthographic. So we'll hit the E key for rotate, and right now it's just free rotate, and I want to make that so I know it's in increments, and the tool was set to 15, I think. So yeah, if I turn snap rotate on, it's 15, but we can do that with the, like I showed you before, we can do that with the rotate tool marking menu. Zero that out, and so let's hit E and left click, and we'll turn on the snap rotate. And now if I grab that X, you can see on 15 increments, so it's 15, 30, 45, you know, all the way over to 90, you know, here. Now you can do it by just hitting 90 there, but just showing you how you can kind of accurately move these things around. Okay, now I want to move this up against this cube, right up against that there, and we'll use the snap. We're going to hit the W key, and we'll hold D for moving it, and then V for the vertex snap. Middle mouse grab that guy, and I'll move it here. You know, point at one of these verts, and you see it drops it there. So now I'm right in that center. And now that I've moved the pivot with a snap, now I just want to move it without moving the pivot. So we'll just leave the move tool on and hit the V key. See, it's turned out here, and then we'll middle mouse this guy, and we put it right up against the cube, like one of these verts. So now it's right against it accurately, and now we're going to use this vert and that vert to center it. So hold the V key down, middle mouse the Y, and we'll put it like here. So I've got that vert lined up, only doing the Y axis, and now I just need one of these things. So hold the V key, middle mouse to the X, and we'll move it to this vert. So now it's right in the middle of that opening, and then we'll hit the R key and we'll scale it down until we have some room here. So there we go. So it's floating in the middle there. Now what we want to do is we want to move the verts of this cube to snap to these edges here of that, and then we'll know we have accurately round thing that'll divide smoothly when we subdivide it. Let's see here. If I go, I mean, I'll try it with the polygons, and I'll show you how to convert it to a subdivision item too. It'll be interesting to see how that one turns out. So I'm going to right-click over this so we come out of object mode into component. So just right-click, and we'll go to the edges, and then we got to select these edges. The newer Maya allows you to double-click this, like any of these edges in the open, and it would select that whole loop in the opening, and we don't have that in this Maya. So you have to be judicious in selecting them. So shift-click here, shift-click here, shift-click here, shift-click here. We're trying to just get this edge on the opening here, and then we're going to extrude it out. And there's a specific option here. So we have that. Now we're in the modeling tools. We go over here to the polygons, or is it edit polygons? Yeah, under edit polygons, there's extrude face, extrude edge, and extrude vertex. And I'm going to use the extrude edge. Let's see if I can turn on the option box here and see what it tells me. Is it letting me click anything here? All right, it's not giving me the keep them all as one. I think that happens after you turn it on. This is important because whether I just click that thing or I click the options here, that we have to consider that when you first use the extrudes in these old Mayas, these individual edges stay individual edges at extrude time. So they're not attached on the ends. I'll show you how this is. Like if I hit extrude edge, and let's pull this on like the Y, you'll see that, this guy's broken off from this one. They extruded them, but these two aren't even really attached. It's just 6 different edges. We don't want that. Control Z, we'll pull back. I still have the extrude engaged, but I'm not going to just extrude them out on something here. Like I could use, like, let's see the Z, and it pulls them. It looks like they're attached, right? But if I go back and I select that edge and I move it, you'll see it's not attached at all. In the extrude edge inputs here, there should be an item for keep faces together. That's, you can find that in the, the attribute editor here. When you have the poly extrude edge, there's the keep faces together option there, or you can see it in the channel box here, which was I turned this on here, and then all the way down at the bottom was that keep faces together. So you have to switch this on by pressing 1 or checking that checkbox. Okay, so now if I grab this edge and I try to move it, now it's actually attached. This is important. This is significant because what I want to do is once these edges are here, I want to scale them in a little bit. So, I extruded them, but I don't want to pull them out. I'm going to pull them in. So I'm going to hit the E key instead of using their gimbal and pulling in just a smidge, and make sure that I turn this history on for keeping faces together. Oh boy, that didn't work either. Hold on, let's see. Undo. Let's go back here. I guess I better do it before. So edit polygons, extrude edge. And before I change anything, I need to change that first. So press 1, enter. And now that they're on, if I hit this scale tool, hopefully they'll come. Yeah, so now it's uniformly coming together, and they should be all still attached instead of separate edges. So let's check that out. Yeah, so now it's all together. And this is important because we don't want to have this a bunch of seams showing up. I'm going to grab this guy. I'm going to scale it down just a little bit further so we're on the inside. And now we'll use the snaps here. So I'll go right click, vertex, click this guy, and we're just going to hold the V. Or we'll hit the W key to turn on the move, and we'll hold the V key down. I'll just middle mouse drag this to this one here, and the same thing. So I don't even have to change the move tool. I'll just leave it invoked. Click that one, hold V, move it, and go around it like this. V here, move. Let's see here. Now if there's a bridge, I wonder if there's an edge bridge in this Maya. We could have just bridged from the one group to the next by combining the 2 items into one mesh. But I'm just showing you how snaps work at the modeling level, which is pretty handy. Okay. Let's see here. I'll pull this guy out. I switch that back to object mode, you know, like when I was in that, and I switch to object mode and click it. You know, it's like getting out of modeling mode here. Is there a bridge? Let's see, extrude faces, bevel. Was there that? This. Cut faces, merge, edge. I wonder if it's merge edge. No, it's not it. I don't know if there's a bridge here. Let's see. Selection, there's grow and alright, so that's not there. Bridge was what in a newer version of Maya you could select that row edges and select a, you know, if you combine these two objects into one, like this mesh, and then I shift, click this guy, and you can go edit poly, or probably here. You can do a combine, and these two will become one object. So this will be now one item that you're animating, but I won't do that here. I'm not gonna bother with that right now. But that's how you take, if you're building multiple pieces and you need it now to be melted into one, you can shift select two items, go up to polygon and say combine. You can also separate them in a different way too, or extract. Like with polygons you can use an extract here to basically, or separate. You can use extract or separate to break items that aren't connected. Like one object might have two separate parts, it's one object, you say separate, and it'll take all the separate mesh islands and make them into individual objects. But we're not doing that now, so let's see here. I'm going to Control H, hide that guy, and now I'm going to go here to the edge, and I'm going to go and select these guys here one more time, and we'll do another edit polygons. Let's see, extrude edge, pull it out like this, keep faces together. Let's change the divisions up. Oh, it does not like that. Wow. Yeah, this is some part where it doesn't like me using the move tool to create that. Let's see if I can use their tool. Okay, shift, extrude edge. Okay, I didn't move it to the move tool. I'm keeping this open here. Keep faces together. Let's see if it'll keep the divisions now. No, it breaks. Wow, I was using their thing. Okay, so that's not working. This is Maya's, some of Maya weak spots in its tools here. If we do extrude edge, let's see here, extrude edge, and I use the move tool to pull this out, will allow me to add divisions. No, this is just does not like this at all. Okay. So we'll use the cut tool to add some divisions over this, so it'll smooth in a little bit of a nicer way. So it won't just cut from this top down. Let's see here, object mode, spacebar here. Let's go with for view. Here I want to cut this one. I want to cut this guy with this tool. I think it's, where does it got cut? Faces tool, but it would cut. It might cut the background too. So what I'm gonna do is instead of cutting across everything, just in cases, I'm gonna isolate this guy, and it's under show. Under any of these menus that have show, there's this thing called isolate select, and then you can use that to hit this view selected checkbox, and it takes everything else in that view, and you know, it's not invisible in the outliner, it's not turned blue, but it's just for this view you've like soloed this item, and this allows me to get in here, and I'm going to use this cut tool, edit polygons, cut, so I can reach across this here, and oops, I wonder what happened here. Lost the edit polygon, cut faces. There we go. There it is. So you get this little arrow here, and I'm going to pull, and if I hit shift, it'll, you know, I can do this. Anywhere I drop this, it'll cut that angle. But if you hold shift, it'll lock it to, like, you know, these 45-degree angles here. So I'm going to put one here, and I'm going to put one here, and I'm going to put one really near the edge here. All right, spacebar here. All right, now there's our cube with the, you know, using snaps to create this round opening here. Let's go back here. So here's the shape I was trying to create. This very round one here. What had happened is that when I extruded this out, some of the points still weren't merged. Even though we had the edges merged, there were some points there that weren't merged, and so it created these hard edges when we did the polygon smoothing here. And what I've done, see, it still creates this strangeness here, but you can change that with options. Like we can use an option on the smooth to fix those edges there. But I had to go through and go by verts and use, under edit polygons, there's merge vertices, and I use a very low setting like this 0.0001, and then I did that on the whole. Like if you select them all, let's see if I'm selecting through the back there, yeah. Merge verts, and then that very low ratio, and then it unified them all so that when I smooth it out, it won't keep these edges hard, like these sides hard. And we should be able to also convert that. Let's do this again here. We'll Control D and move this guy over here. And what we want to do is create, or we'll convert this polygons to subdivision, and this should also round out. Let's see, here's that one doing that. I don't know if it is or not. Let's see. Yeah, now it's doing it. Yeah, so now we turn this polygon object into a subdiv, and it actually kept the same face count, interestingly enough. That's good. And now I can use 2 or 3 to round this out, so it's kind of like acting like a NURBS object. And then you can also, you know, that's the way to get that look, is convert it to subdiv if you want to keep the low mesh count and still have a smoothed out mesh. And we can also show you how that, what that's actually doing here. We'll pull this guy over here, go polygon smooth. Let's see here, it makes this weird edge at the front, but we can go to the poly smooth input that it adds to it, and we can see, is it this one? No, not keep hard edges, keep tessellation, or no, undo geometry borders, there we go. And now it's got, that'll round that out. And we can do subdivision level 1, 2, or 3. I'll hit 3, should be the, run it through a process here. Yeah. There we go, this looks right. Alright, so that's some modeling tips for Maya 6.5, trying to do kind of new school, you know, quad modeling in the older Mayas. Another useful feature is if you have, like, say, a sphere or even a cylinder, how to top it off by using the delete edges, so you can turn triangles into quads. Let's see here, I'll show you a couple. I'll create the cylinder again. Let's move this over here. And you can see here on these top and bottom we have, let's do this 4 here. You have the triangles on the top and bottom. What you could do, there's 2 ways to do it. You can delete the top and bottom polygons. Oh, wait, hold on. Get this, I'll isolate this show. You selected here. Is this shaking again? Okay, maybe this makes it more stable. Sorry about the camera bumping. Alright, so we're going to isolate that guy. And there's a couple things here we can do. Make this vert, see if we can grab these guys and grab the 2 verts on the top and the bottom with an 8-sided cylinder, and we'll do chamfer vertex, and you can see here that it breaks it open there. Doesn't make a quad. Let's see here, and then we'll use the scale tool, and I'm going to lock it on the Y plane. So we're going to scale on the X and Z by clicking on the Y, and you'll see it'll scale both those relative to their X and Y without moving them off the X and Z without moving them off the Y plane. Made a big thing here, it's like a nice edge loop. And we can also then go edit, or wait, let's scale it back actually a little bit. Let's scale back down to here. And then we'll do this edit polygon, and there's a thing called poke faces. Now poke faces, what it will do is it will take any polygon and turn it into triangles. It'll take every point, and it puts a vert in the average center So in this one, it should be right in the middle. You see it makes these nice, you know, pie wedges out of the top. And these are triangles. Now, if you want to make quads out of triangles, as long as you have an even amount, you delete every other edge. So let's right click, menu, we'll hit this edge thing here, and we'll go click every other edge, skip an edge, click an edge, skip an edge, click an edge. Here, and we'll do that on the bottom too. Let's see, so which ones are these ones here? So edge, skip, edge, skip, edge, skip, and then we'll go up here to edit polygons again, and we'll hit delete edge. And this is important for deleting edges versus just hitting the delete key, because if you have multiple points on an edge, it will get rid of them as well. So this keeps the geometry clean. And here now you see they're quads, so it's not just gonna, you know, make this more like triangle out when it subdivides. It'll make it smooth because it's made from quads, and this is like a new school modeling thing that you can still do in this old Maya. And let's also give this guy some. So that's how to cap when you have triangles at the ends of something. That's how to cap it off. And let's see if I can space into the triple view here. I'll do the side, isolate select view, hit F to zoom in, and we'll use that cut again, cut faces tool. I'll make some loops here. I'll do one in the middle also, yeah. All right, now we can smooth that out if we want, but we can also convert that to a or a subdivision. So let's see here, let's modify, let's duplicate it, Control D so we can compare it here. Oh yeah, let's put that wireframe on shading in. Shading, wireframe on shaded, see everything here. We'll convert this one to subdivision, modify, convert polygons to subdiv. There we go, hit the 2 and the 3. And you've got this nice smoothed out item that will render pretty smooth. You can also Control D that one and see the pure polygon version instead of subdivision. So polygons, smooth. Go over here to the history, or you could do it in the channel box. You'll see the input here, poly smooth face, subdivisions under 1, hit 3. Get that similar. Turn off the wireframe on shaded. So there's subdiv and pure polygon smoothing. All right, let's get into, now what's the next thing we can discuss here for early Maya, general Maya knowledge here. Let's do, before we get into lighting and shading, let's jump over to plugging attributes into each other and kind of show you more about this this way where the Maya philosophy for animation and rigging and everything. So having all this information and being able to plug different attributes into each other. Let's do that before we get into the lighting and shading. So let's delete some of these here. Let's get rid of some of these guys. Got some nice shapes here. Something like the torus. Move this guy here. Alright, let's make this like a little lighting area here first. So I'm going to extrude some edges up. I'll switch over to edge selection here, right clicking over the object. Click these two edges. I'll hit edit polygons, and we'll do extrude edge. Pull it up. We got a little area we can bounce some light off of here. Let's do this again. Keep the faces together on. Press 1 in there. Now they're all attached. I think they're attached. Let's check. Just click that edge, and if it pulls the other edge. Yeah. Alright. So we have that. Let's talk about attribute modification. So let's say one of the things I really love about Maya is that everything in Maya is, every item in Maya is a name and it has a dot attribute. So if you have like the sphere and you have these, the object name is, you know, the transform name is NURBSphere1, and that's like the, and then there's the shape node, and we have these attributes here. And if I change this X here, I can change this to 0. It moves to 0, and it's basically the transform name is NURBSphere1, and its dot attribute I change is dot translate X, and you can see that reflected in this script editor here. If we go to the script editor, you can see that like it's everything in Maya is basically running. It's looking at the name and it's looking at the dot attribute of the name. So if you're changing the transform, it's name dot, you know, here it says NURBSphere dot translate 0 because I did that. And let's say if I go translate X, we're gonna have to create it. We're going to put them side by side so it'll cover it up here. And if I say let's move X to 1, you see here it says set attribute. That's one of the commands underneath. NURBSphere1, which is the name, and the dot attribute translate X is now 1. And that's happens. And basically everything in Maya is that you change and you interact with is a command, like it's some sort of Maya command, like a Mel script command. And then it's looking at the name of the object and its dot attribute they're changing. So, and this happens across the whole thing, whether it's shaders or shape nodes or anything. So we can go modify, you know, that was the transform that moves it around, but let's say we want to change one of the stats on the this NURBSphere itself. So instead of 4 spans, let's do like 6. Can we do that here? Let's see. Can I modify these here? These aren't the ones I modify, it's the make NURBSphere. Sections 8, so let's put 10, and spans 8. And you can see here as I change those, this was under the make NURBSphere item, so that's the name, make NURBSphere1 dot sections equals 10, so that's the attribute is dot sections. And NURBSphere make NURBSphere1 name dot attribute spans is now equal to 8. And this is important for you to understand because behind, under the hood of Maya, this is what's going on behind the UI. Is this set of commands is happening underneath everything that you do. You can go to the area light. I've selected the area light. You see there, like I selection cleared, which is when I selected nothing. Select flag CL. Select recursive area light 1, and let's make the intensity 10. So it's going to be area light dot intensity with a space 10. I'll hit enter. Area light shape 1. Oh yeah, that's right. Area light 1 is the transform. That's where it is in the world. Area light shape 1 is the actual area light stuff. So area light shape 1 is the name dot attribute intensity, which is what we changed, and now that's equals 10. So the reason why I'm showing this to you is because I can show you how you can customize these things in Maya. You know, whether we're making Mel scripts to make our own custom shelf buttons, we can modify, like we can make our own marking menus like this. We can do our own marking menu, custom marking menus, and I'm going to show you how to do that later. How to take all these polygon tools and make one kind of uber modeling thing. Because in the later Mayas they have these modeling marking menus where you can like shift right click, and if you have an item selected, it brings up items, you know, tools. If you have a polygon selected, shift right click brings up the polygon tools. If you have an edge selected, shift right click brings up only the edge tools. And it's really useful because it's Maya's looking at your selection and going, these are the only tools that you would use based on what you have selected. So you don't need all the, you know, it like keeps your focus narrowed down to what's useful to your selection, which is very handy in the later Mayas. They didn't implement it at this early phase in Maya, but it's very useful in later Mayas. And you can still reverse, you can come back to these older Mayas and take those ideas and still apply them here if you understand how the underlying you know, language is doing what it's doing. What's the methodology, like the philosophy behind Maya's like transform shape node shaders, and then all those things in those transform shape nodes and shaders, or the tools that plug in the history, that all those things are just a name of an item that has a dot attribute that you're changing. And the cool thing is you can make your own, items, you know, your own attributes to manipulate these things all in one place. So let's say we have this sphere, and let's apply a shader to it. Like I'll right click here, and let's see here, we have materials down here, and we'll go assign new material, and I'll just apply a Lambert to it. And so now we have this new Lambert. I'll call this like light, you know, and you have this incandescence, right? So you can turn this thing up, and you can see here, this is a way to, you know, make the light turn on and off if you're doing that with shaders. Now, if you're an animator, and let's say you have some sort of UFO or car, like it's a car with headlights, and you're animating, if you want to go in and you go, oh, let me go to the shader, so you got to go up here. I'll delete the history here so we don't look at all these other status. Delete history, so we should have 3, yeah. The transform, the shape node, and the shader. An animator could go up in here and find this and then set this keyframe. You know, you go to frame 1 and go, you know, okay, set this key here, and then you could go to frame 50 and set the key here, and then you'd have this animation between 0 and 50. But what we want is we may want to put a lot of different stats in one place. So if you have car doors that are open and wheels that turn and all these things, you'd have to go to each individual component and click and find each of these things and you know, animate them where they are. And you can, what you can do with Maya that's really neat is that you can customize, and this is, you know, part of why it's so successful, is that you can do so much with the application and the way that you build things inside of it to optimize your workflow. So let's try to do, I'll show you how that works. Like, let's say we're going to build a rig that has, you know, multiple things on it. We'll do create, space create. I'll just create a little circle here. This would be our controller. So where's this guy? This is on 1, 0, out these two, the X and the Z. 0 this out. I'm going to freeze the scale. I scaled this up to 1.8, but I want this scale that it is now to be the new 1.0 scale. So I'm going to select across these 3, right click, and I'm going to say, oh, they don't have that menu on this early Maya. They had a freeze those here, but they don't in this early version. Okay, so up here, if we go, let's see, edit, is it modify? Yeah, freeze transforms, and this will take your stats and reset them wherever it is. It'll reset that as the new position. So I don't want to freeze the translator to rotate. I just want to freeze the scale, which is what's collected here. It's what's selected. Hit freeze transform. Okay, so now this size of the sphere is now the new, you know, default 1 level size, you know, at 1. So now it will scale relative to that. That's its default 1:1 ratio, and that's a good thing to know. If you set up a scale of something like an airplane, you make it based on the centimeter grid. You make this big thing, and then once it's all done, you scale it right, and then you can freeze that and you say, okay, this is the new default 1.0 scale size. Alright, so we have that. Let's get this circle here a little bigger. Some nerves here. And this will be our controller, because what you'll do when you hand these things to animators, you don't want them to probably touch your geometry, you just want them to touch the animation controls. And we'll see, this is interesting usage case for the display area, because I keep clicking the background. So I'm going to go in here, layer, and say we'll create the layer, and then I will add this object to the layer, add selected objects, and then I'll turn this into a reference. So now I can't click it. Now I can grab that pretty easy. Alright, that's our circle. We'll come up here and rename it, you know, sphere. Oh, whoops, what's it going on here? I can't. Okay. Double click this guy here to get in here. Click sphere CTRL, make that a controller. And we'll also reset the scale here. So this is because I scaled it up. So, old habits die hard. Freeze the transforms. Okay. That's now its new default. Now I have this selected. I'm going to select this one first, then shift select that sphere. And I'm going to go to the rigging, or the animation, and we'll constrain this with a parent constraint. Hit this and we'll say maintain offset. Apply. Okay, so now this controller controls that sphere. So if I slide this guy around, it's actually animating the sphere with it. And now you can see the sphere has this blue, which is saying it's being controlled by something else. And let's say, okay, here on our controller, we want to control, instead of going into the sphere, instead of the animator going into the sphere and finding the shader, the light, and then animating this, we're going to put that in a spot where he can get to it at the channel box. So instead of having to go into the attribute editor and find something, when he's on the sphere control, we can add another attribute here to this channel list that he can just see while he's animating these numbers here. So this is easier. So we'll go, we have this thing, and we're going to go to the attribute editor and this thing, and we see up here in this attribute menu, we're going to add an attribute. This little thing comes up. We know we want this to be a float because we want it to be not at integers or whole numbers, and floats are decimal, so we're going to have a decimal point. I'm going to call this attribute name light underscore off underscore on. The name is just for your reference. This isn't any programming thing. It's just for you to see. That's what's going to show up in the channel box is what you name the attribute. It's a float. We'll make the minimum. The default minimum is 0, so it doesn't go below 0. The maximum will be 1, so it doesn't go above 1. And the default is 0, so it starts at 0. And we'll add it. Then we'll close this. Click on that guy, the controller, and let's go to the channel box. You'll see here, there it is. You have your new attribute. Now I can middle mouse drag while I have that selected, and you'll see it's like, well, if I hold control, it'll, yeah, it's trying to go. See, it's going decimal point here. So yeah, I can go up and down between, 0 and 1. And it's not doing anything because it's just an attribute. It's just a number going up and down inside this thing. And we're going to connect it now, and this is so that you understand like the philosophy under the hood of Maya and how you can connect things to anything if you're, if you think of it right, you plan it right. We're going to connect that attribute to the shader that was the part of the incandescence attribute over here. So we're going to take that stat here, and we're going to go find on this guy. Here's the light. So the light dot incandescence. We're going to connect those two, so that this name dot attribute that we made here connects to this name dot attribute here, and we're going to go do that in the hypergraph. So we get the hypergraph open, and here's our sphere control here. Oh, I got to change the view here. I'm going to change it like this. Change it to this breakout here. So we got the sphere controller, and we still need the shader in here. We don't have the shader visible. So let's go up to the nerve sphere, shift select that guy, and we'll push this again to see if we can see the connections here. And here's this shader group. So let's grab the sphere, the shader group, and the controller, and remap again and see what's connected to all of those. And click that. Okay, so here's our light, and then there's our sphere control, and that's what we're trying to connect. It's these two. So we've got that and this, and we want to connect those two. So I'm going to middle mouse drag that over this, and let that go, and we're going to go other. We're going to press other, and it's going to bring up the connection editor. And your custom attributes, it'll be left to right. Your custom attributes should be at the bottom. So you see the sphere control here. We'll scroll down, and there's the light, and then what we wanted, the incandescence, and I'm going to just connect it to all three of these. So this, and you'll see this happen here. I'm going to connect that to the R. You see one jumps right there, the G, and the B. And now that's connected to all three. So it'll basically go from black to white because I didn't, they're all going to move uniformly. And so now I've made this connection. And we'll close this guy. And now, instead of having to go to the shader and hit keyframes and everything like that, your animator has these animation, in the channel box, and then there's this extra little controller. Left click this guy and middle mouse drag in the window, and there I'm going from 0 to 1. And so now I've created a custom connection in Maya, and you can keyframe this too, and it just drives the shader. So I'm over here, and I go, okay, I want this guy to be 0 at the first keyframe. Right click, key selected. It's got a little set for a keyframe there, and I can go up here to like frame 30. Select that attribute, right middle mouse drag. When you have the attribute selected, it goes up. Right click, key selected, and now I've animated that shader and its incandescence channel without having to go in once that whole rig's set up. So you could do this with like the doors opening and closing by connecting like open close to the translate Y or the rotate Y. Closed is 0, open is 45 degrees for the left door, and negative 45 degrees for the right door as the 0 to 1 position. You can have tire rotations, but you could do like windows rolling up and down based on the Y you know, if you set a group off of the angle and then, you know, make it go on the Y. And so you can do all these things and put all those attributes on a controller, like under the car. So you got light on and off, doors open, close, windows roll up and down. You keep adding those and then just connect them, like this connects to the translate Y, this connects to the incandescence 0 to 1, this connects to, you know, and this is like the general baseline workflow inside of Maya that makes it really fun and easy to work with. Like you can come up with things. You don't have to have all these plugins written or something, or these features that are not in other programs. In Maya, it just lets you plug name.attributes into other name.attributes. And if you're just creative enough, you can come up with all kinds of things, which is why it's used in the industry. All right, so that's a good breakdown of Maya. What else? I could show you how to make stuff. I think I'm going to do a different video to show you some Mel scripting and everything like that. But to wrap this video up, we'll go into some lighting and shading. So let's go to, let me delete this character here. We'll get this out. I want to do, I'm going to hide this one. Hide this polygon here, and I'll hide this one. Keep the NURBS ones visible, and we'll shade, see what these look like shaded, and then we'll maybe compare it to the polygon ones. So let's move this guy over. Let's put some textures on this box, like I was saying earlier. We always need a sphere. Let's create another. Do I have the polysphere? NURBS sphere? I don't. Okay, NURBS. I'll make a sphere here. Make a big thing here. Move this up. Spacebar that. Let's see. Just trying to go to the foreview. Tend to like that outliner. Blows up my foreview. All right, so let's start putting shaders and textures on this thing here. So for the noob sphere, I'm gonna right-click material, assign new material, put a Fong E. I like the Fong E. It's a little, the reflection's a little bit more closer to Fresnel, and it's not a Fresnel, but it has a closer look to Fresnel. I'm gonna turn this roughness down to 0, so it's like straight polish, and we're gonna do this as green. Let's do a red cylinder. I'll right click here, assign new material, Fong E. Click this guy, we'll make it red. Turn it down a little bit so it doesn't blow out. And we'll turn that roughness also down. Let's click this guy here and see what we have. And turn this brightness down a little bit on the green so it's not so blown out. And then we'll do this guy, material, assign new material, Fong E again. I want to make them all shiny. Make this one blue. Turn the brightness down a little bit. Roughness down here so it's shiny. I want to scale this up a little bit. And I'm going to move the pivot point to the bottom of that thing here. And then I can scale it up on the ground. There we go. It's kind of fun to light these. Like this. Yeah. And we have our area light. Where did I put my area light here? I'll hold the V key for snapping down and move it to this edge here. Okay, so we know that's where that was. Move this over, E key to rotate. Still got the snaps on. If you hold the E and left click, you can turn that snap rotate off and on. So I'll leave that. Turn this up, turning it on the world. You know, if it was going with the object, you can move it up and down. Hold W and left click, switch to world. Here, scale this guy up. And let's see, intensity is good. And oh yeah, what else did I want to show you? I want to show you like camera. So we'll make a custom camera here real quick so I can make the scene camera. So we'll go create. I want to show you this some other functions that you can do here while we're building shaders. I can show you too. So we have this camera. We'll just create a camera. It drops us in the scene here. You know, down here we have this little camera guy. Move this over here. We can rotate this. Move it up, you know, we can look through it too by going up to panel and go perspective here. We can go orthographic or perspective, and you see you got this new camera one. It'll drop me in here, so now I can start navigating this camera how I want. And it's not gonna be that different. I'll select the big box here, which I can't do because it's in a visibility layer. So click this guy, we'll turn off reference. Click the box and hit fit, okay. And now we want to see like the camera. What it actually sees, setting in the like whatever your resolution is for the frame, it'll show the the outside edge of the camera. So we've got this 640 by 480. I'm going to make this like 720 HD. So this is a 16 by 9, and we'll go over here to view with, see camera settings. I'll say show me the film gate, and also show me the resolution gate. All right, so there. Now this is these, you know, above and below those green lines here at this 1280 by 720. That's outside the frame. So now we know what the camera's actually seeing as long as it's inside that frame here. Okay, so this is cool. You can switch here, but there's also a neat thing where instead of switching between the cameras here, you can just drag and drop from the outliner. So if I want to, let's say I'm in perspective, change the, like this is me looking around, and there's my main camera here. If I want to look through this camera, I can actually grab with a middle mouse click the one in the outliner and just move it into the view, and it changes the camera that way. So I can middle mouse click perspective, do that view. I can middle mouse click front, change the front view. This is a pretty neat little trick. It's just kind of hidden in Maya. That's useful. I also want to move this camera up to the other cameras to clean up my outliner. So I'm going to middle mouse click this guy, and you can see like if it's square, it's going to drop it in there like hard parenting. Like this will become a child of that object, which we don't want. And when you're between objects, it makes that little line, and that's like saying you want to place it there in the list. So I want to put this up by the other camera. So I'm going to put this up here and drop it, and now it's up here, easy to find. And I also want to clean up my items, and so I want to take all the objects and put them in a group. So I got plane, control, select, cylinder, control, select, all these guys here. And then I'm going to hit control G to group, and it creates this group. Now under here is everything in the scene. I don't want this group to move, although I could, you know, move the group, and now you see everything in the scene is all kind of grouped together, and yet the individual objects you can still move, you know, you can still move these underneath. All I wanted to do is create this group is for the sake of organization. So I'm going to double click this guy, rename it. I'm going to go underscore 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 objects. This is just a like a organization for me. A lot of people don't set up their Maya scene this way, but I like to do it for cleaning up the way the outliner looks. Because I don't want this to move, I'm going to go over here with this group selected. This transform, basically I'm going to select all these guys on the right click and hit lock selected. So now this will never move, but it's at world 0, so it's almost like any objects underneath it are also under world, you know, at world 0. And this allows me to close this up, and then I've got this cleaner outliner, and I've got this area light. I'm also going to add a ambient light later, so we'll clean this up. So I'll control G, and we'll put under here, double click, go under here and go underscore 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 capital lights. Same thing. I'm going to drag across here, lock selected. So now I've got this. So now I know all my light things will be under here, and all my objects that I want to animate are under here. This is just my own way of organizing a scene, so I can clean up the outliner, because the outliner can get really busy after a lot of items are in a scene. Okay, and we have this camera. I do this with cameras sometimes too, so I group. So usually I won't have more than one camera. If I do, I end up doing this anyway. Cameras. And then let's see, we could alphabetize this. So middle mouse drag this above lights, and middle mouse drag this below. Wait, how are we going to do that? So below, drag above. Okay, so now it's like alphabetize CLO. So underneath my cameras is the camera 1, but I'm going to lock this so I don't move the group, just move the camera itself. Okay, so it's kind of neat way you can switch view here. You can also do it with light. If you want to look through the light, you can middle mouse drag the area light, and you're seeing what the light's seeing. If the field of view is a little skewed, you can kind of tell you're looking through a light here. And this is a neat little trick here. Okay, so there's that. Let's see, let's start looking at this, and we got to start putting textures on something so I can show you the hypershade and how that works, and also just how modular some of these things in Maya are. So I've got this set up. We're in Maya software. Should we do Maya software or should we do Mental Ray? Oh, I don't have Mental Ray even turned on here. Let's see here if I need to turn on Mental Ray. Is it here? Settings, preferences, plugin manager. We should have Mental Ray in 6.5. Maya to Mental Ray, here we are. So it's like in Maya, turn this on here. like mental ray has a little bit more of an accurate light thing. I have the auto load, so it always comes up with Maya. Close. So we're in our global settings here. I'm going to switch this over to mental ray. It's going to be very similar to the settings if you've watched my Softimage tutorial, you'll see that a lot of these settings are similar to that, only the UI is very different. So go over here to mental ray, and like we did in the Softimage one, we're going to leave this draft -2. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go down even further. We're going to go -4, -3, so we can do some previews first. This early stuff is going to be preview, so we don't need this very high. Ray tracing is already on. Don't have to mess with the rest. Just turn these samples way down. -4, -3. And we have this light. And let's just do a test render. Save my scene, just in case it crashes. We'll hit test render here. We'll just look at what it looks like. And it should render pretty quick. I don't think I have any shadows turned on. It should just get through it without too much struggle here. Yeah, it gets through it pretty quick. It's really over bright too. So there's our render. We're a little bit bright because I had turned up the intensity on the attribute here. But there's no decay. There's no decay on the light. So I'm going to put, let's do a quadratic decay. And then we'll go over here to shadows. And we'll go past the depth map shadows and we'll turn on ray trace shadows, and I'll drop this shadow rays up to 8. And let's do another render test here. Let's see what we get now that we have some drop off. It's probably going to be too dark, set at a 10 intensity. And we'll put some shaders and some textures on the ground. Yeah, now we're very dark, but at least there's a nice fall off here. So it's getting darker further away from the light instead of a uniform light no matter how far you're away. So that's pretty quick. It's kind of ugly, but you can see quickly what's going on. So I'll minimize this. Oh, where does it drop it? It drops it up here, yeah, at the top instead of the bottom, so we can get to that there. So let's do, if it's quadratic, let's try 50 and hit this guy again, and we'll hit test render and see if it's come up. This allows you to iterate. It's not pretty, but what you want is you want fast iterations, so you can set your lighting up really quickly instead of setting the quality settings very high and then waiting for a render really long and then going, oh, it's not even the right brightness, or it's not, the shadows aren't turned on or something. So we want this quick interactive style first to set up our scene. All right, 50's better. We're starting to see some stuff here, but it's still a little bit too dark. We've got our little reflective objects and some gray background. We're not quite there, so I'll go back to the area light. Let's try 120. And try it again. Get a little bit closer here. You can use the IPR. The Maya software is better at the IPR, especially with an O2. I've got this 400 megahertz O2. If you have like a dual CPU octane, you could probably use the IPR a little bit faster, but I tend to just go with this low sample setting to do an initial setup. All right, not bad. Still want it a little brighter. I want to hit that back wall a little bit more. So let's try 160. And we don't want to blow out our hotspot though. We want to get it bright enough to light the scene, but we don't want to over bright where the light is close to. So we might have to raise the light up a little bit. So I want to evenly light the scene. Getting closer. Okay, that's not bad. One more, maybe 2. Starting to get bright there at that spot, but let's see here. Let's go 215. Hit this guy. Scaled this down so we can see everything, and then we'll start getting into the hypershade, and I'll show you some other UI features. Almost there. Maybe 240. 240 might be too hot there, but let's just see. Let's just see here. Quadratic fall off makes a very big difference. Sometimes I use linear and I'll just put it up to 30. It's not physically accurate, but it does give you a nice fall off. It feels photoreal. But the quadratic is technically photoreal the way Mental Ray uses it. Wow, that still feels kind of dark. Let's see here. Oh my god. It still feels a little dark. It feels a little dark to me. Let it be brighter, okay. Thing wants to talk big numbers to fill this scene up. Alright, one more try, 300. Probably a little too bright on the floor now, but I'll just move the light up. Not bad. Looks like 400 megahertz, O2, and it's doing a pretty good job of getting through these test frames here. Alright, still not happy with that brightness, even at 300. So I'm going to do, let's see, I'm going to move it up a little bit on the Y, try the light here, I'll move this up a little bigger, and I'm going to use the scale so I can make it a little bigger so it spreads the light out more. And hopefully maybe 325 will get us the level we want without over-brighting the ground. There we go. It's starting to look good. It's a little more contrasty on the video than it is in my screen here, but it's starting to show up how I want. But yeah, you can see this hot spot. There's starting to be a hot spot here. So I'll move it up a little bit more. And a little bit higher. And then I'll scale it up a bit. And bring it down. And we should be good. Do 345. And then we'll put some shaders. There we go. That's it. I'll take the diffuse down on the floor later too. That's looking pretty good. Alright, so let's go back. Okay, so now I've got the light level that I like, at least for the area light. And what we'll do is we're now going to put a texture on the floor, and we'll put some shaders on the walls here. So I'll close this up and we'll get into higher quality a little bit. Okay, so I have this. So far you've seen me apply shaders to the whole object. You can actually apply by face. In the industry, they like to only have one shader per item. They don't like to use face selection, so you might break these into the walls into separate pieces, but I'm just going to show you you can do this. So we'll go right click face, and I'm going to click the floor. You might have the dots in the middle, so I got to make a separate thing for that. You select that polygon, right click, we'll go down to materials, assign a new material, and assign a new Lambert. That does this, brings this up, Lambert 3, I'm just going to call this floor. Oops, I left the capital in there. We got capital F-L-O-R. And then I'll hit this right here to this guy. We'll right click, materials, assign new material again. I'll do another Lambert. And we'll call this the blue underscore wall, and I'll just change it right now. Let's do this blue here. You can see it makes it blue here, except I'll hit this guy, right click, same thing, down this material, assign new material, and you can do this. Actually, well, let's show you the other way here, so I can show you how we can assign here. We'll do this, assign the Lambert, and I'll show you how you can assign shaders from the other places too. So we'll call this one red underscore wall, and we'll make this one red. And come down in brightness a little bit. Object mode. Okay, so now this single object, instead of just being, I've got some history here. Let's delete the history. Delete the history on it so you can see the few things here. Okay, so I have, it even says I have the initial shading group somehow. but it has the different Lamberts on it, the different things. So you've got this blue, this red, and this floor, all on this one object here. And we can do, what we'll do is we'll apply the texture in Hypershade. I'll show you how to do that, but you can also I'll show you how it goes in different ways. So let's go up here to Window. There's Rendering Editors. There's this Hypershade here. You could remap this to a place on the shelf too if you don't want to get to it here. In mine, I might have mapped it here. Yeah. Here's a custom markup menu that I made that I haven't shown you guys. Like if I spacebar and middle mouse click in the middle, you see I got Hypershade, Graph, Outliner in the UV window. This isn't default. This is a custom thing that I've done, so that instead of having to go up here and, you know, Window, Render, blah, hit Hypershade, and some people just drop them in the shelf here. I wonder if you can Control Shift in this old one and do it. So if we hit the rendering editor, see if it works. Control Shift left click. Yeah, it doesn't work. In the newer Mize, when you do that with a shelf open, it just adds the button there. And so what we would have to do is capture it in the script editor to get that as a button. Which, let's see, I can show you here if we have the script editor. Let's invoke I have this thing here under here that says echo all commands. You have to turn this on and it'll give you all these commands that come through. And we'll say Window, Rendering, Editors, and then Hypershade. And then it brings this up. But what we can do, if we don't want to chase it down, we can put it on the shelf. We have to go get it. You'll notice that it made a bunch of commands as it had to draw all these things. So we have to go back up and kind of figure out where this was. Here it is, Hypershade window. You can select across here, make sure you get that little semicolon here. And I'm going to middle mouse drag that up here and drop it in the shelf. And so now I have this button that is the Hypershade window if I wanted to go get it again, if I don't want to go. And I've applied that. I can make a marking menu and get that command. When you build marking menus, you can grab commands out of here and drop them into marking menus. And then you end up with, you know, a little command like this. I don't know if I have my other one. Do I have the other one? No, I haven't built the Z menu yet. But I can make one without the whole hotbox around it too. That's just those items that I wanted. Okay, so here we have this. This Hypershade's pretty complex, but not too hard to navigate. We understand what's going on. It has these tabs for the different things. You have your materials are shown in this window here under this tab. If you have any textures in the scene, they're here. We don't have any yet. There's utilities, like if you apply reverses or any of these things down here, like blends and gamma corrects and everything, they'll show up in here. There's all your lights, your cameras. Shading groups are what attach the shader to the geometry, so they all get dropped here. And there's, you know, this thing's kind of self-explanatory. So here's our list of shaders. We don't have that many. And you can scale this just like you do a view. Like we can scale this down by, let's see here if I, can't I scale it down? I thought I could scale it down. Oh yeah, using the Alt key, Alt and mouse key. So Alt middle mouse drag is like pulling this, and Alt middle and left allows you to scale this down so you can make the list smaller here. And then we have this work area. This thing can be cleared many times. Also, when you see these shaders, you don't see everything hooked to them here in the list. This is just the list for the shaders. And down here, it's like it'll show you what's going on with the shader, if anything. So let's grab the blue wall or the floor. I can grab the floor. And this little thing here, this little blue icon, you can graph it here. You can also right click this and it'll bring up a marking menu for the Hypershade. You can graph it here too. And then it drops it into the work area, and you see there's nothing attached, so it just gives us this. And so what we can do is we can attach things here by dragging them from this list. And we want a texture, so we're gonna go up here and we go, okay, we need a file for this texture of the floor. So I'm gonna middle mouse drag that guy here, and it drops the file. This is one way. This is like a manual way to do this. The other way is if you're on the texture itself, if you're on the shader, let's see here, if we go to like the floor, you can just click this checker box and it will start a connection, and it will also attach it this way. But I'm just showing you kind of how the Hypershade works here. And how there's a lot of ways you can connect things. So let's go into this file node. And we see here with the file node and the attribute editor comes up, it's like, okay, there's no image plugged in. So we'll click the little file guy, and I should have a thing that I can throw in right away, like a wooden one. I think think I have something here that's already under here. Is there source images? Where is it? Default project, so it's here. Let's see. Sort by name. And then I've got, is there flat wood in here? I don't, pardon me for a minute while I look for this texture that I thought I had already in here. Is it under images? Oh yeah, under images. So under flatwood 1, I should have this. We'll open this guy up, and it should load that piece of wood in here. There it is. It's pretty fancy, pretty high res for even for this era. This would have been high res, very high res. And now we have this thing loaded here, and there's a couple things you can do. You can just middle mouse drag this over this and drop it in like I did with the connection editor, and it'll give you these defaults. If it's not here, you can hit other, but you can say, okay, we want this to be the color, and it'll attach it. And it'll take a second. It'll turn that, you know, gray into a wooden. It'll wrap that texture around it based on the UV layout. And give it a second to refresh. It's really got to load all that information in there. Hear the O2 cooking. Oh wow, and we're already on texture view. So like I said before, if we go over here and look, this thing's already in texture view. So I had 4 was the wireframe, 5 was the shaded, and I pressed 6 and it's still in the 6 texture view. And now you can see that texture is loaded in there, and this O2 does a pretty darn good job with it. It really does. It's refreshing that. That's a pretty big JPEG. I mean, this is, you can see if I zoom in here, this thing isn't pixelating even really close. So this is a monster JPEG, and this old SGI is still, look at that, it's handling it pretty darn smoothly. I'm pretty impressed. And it's displaying it full res here. Alright, so there you go. There's a nice wooden floor, but let's look at some other things here. I drag that there to connect it, but one thing that's really neat is there's multiple ways to do these things, kind of like the way I drag the cameras into the view here, is let's disconnect this guy. I'll grab the little connection here, hit delete. I can also, holding onto the floor, and you see this here, these are all like slots, you know. So while I can press this button and it would, you know, bring up a new file node, and then I press a file and then it would add the file node and connect it for me by just clicking this. Or if I just chose a procedural, it would bring the procedural into the utility and connect it for me. That's kind of macro functions. You can also just drag this guy here instead of like trying to connect it in the connection editor, you know, with the Hypershade. You can middle mouse this guy over here, and you can see it makes these boxes. So let's drag it here, connect to the color, and again, it makes the connection for you, just like as if I connected it here, and it'll do the same thing. It'll load in the texture and load it up here. And so you can see that Maya has this like modular way. There's multiple ways to do things, you know. It's like, one, we assign shaders here by middle mouse over something and then go in materials. But let's say you're just building a shader from scratch. In here you go, oh, okay, well, let's say I don't want that floor like that. I want to do, right, you know, we'll go here, up here, and we'll say, let's just grab a new Lambert, drag it in here, and this will be our, we'll rename this like checker floor. Checker, oops. Checker underscore floor, you know, and then let's grab this procedural. So I'm going to hold this into the work area here, and you can see they can share space, or if I'm done with this for now, I can right click and just graph this, clears out the work area and shows me what's going on with this shader. But if I need to go back to see what's connected to this, graph this again, and there's our connection. This is how you place it is added to the file node. If I want to tile it or move it off the center, I can use this place 2D texture and move it around that way. But yeah, we'll go to our checker floor, we'll graph that, and Alt move the view here, and I'll come down to the procedurals. Here's the checker. Drop it in here, and I can middle mouse drag that over here to do the color. And there's our checker thing, and then I can also, you know, you can even drag and drop thing here. So let's say I want to apply that to the sphere. So middle mouse, so you don't even have to have the sphere grabbed. I can middle mouse drag this and say I'll drop that on that sphere. and it does it that way, you know. Or you can undo, and I can have this selected, and you can right click over this and say assign the material to selection with this marking menu. Same thing. So there's a lot of different ways to, you know, Maya's got all these little menus everywhere, and it's just about being modular and having ways to do things. There's multiple ways to do something, and this makes it so you develop these workflows, and there's still other workflows available. It just depends on how you like to work. It's very customizable. And so, okay, so we've got some nice information there about how the Hypershade works. We grabbed a command out of the command window and made a button for it. Let's test it out. We'll close this guy here. Test our little button. Just press the Mel button. Bam, brings up the Hypershade. And so you can make, you know, if you want all your most used tools, you can make a shelf out of them, or like I did, you can do this, and I've got them here, like in this inner HOTBOX. I should make one that's just by itself, like one of these kind of menus, you know. There's modeling, rendering. I can switch modes with this one. I could do that, and I want to make a modeling marking menu. I'll do it in a different tutorial for all the modeling functions. And now let's get back to the lighting here. Let's close this up, and let's add, we need to look at this kind of high quality now that we've got a nice looking thing. And we should need this, since this isn't a reflector card, this is lighting, but we want it to be reflected in here. We'll have to create a polygon plane and line it up behind there so that it creates the reflection highlight. It looks a little bit more photoreal. So let's see here. Let's look at our quality here. We'll click this guy and see what our wood looks like, how bright everything is. And then we will refine the render settings and make a nicer image. I think this is looking pretty good as far as our quality goes. I mean, as far as our lighting level goes. Yeah, I like that. A little contrasty in the video though. Alright, it's pretty good. Let's close that. We'll create another piece of geometry here. Spacebar, create polygon primitive, the plane. And now I'm going to show you a hard parenting with the area light here. So I could move this. I could navigate this up to the light, and you know, and size it up. I can also do the channel box trick that I showed you earlier in the tutorial. So we can go here, and I want to shift click the light, and now I'm just going to click in the translate X, and I'm going to tab 3 times, tab, tab, tab. Now it's there. It's using this light as its position. I can tab, tab, and you know, it's using that rotation. Now it's on the same rotation, but we can rotate that here. I think I have the snap rotate, turn that on so I can do it in increments. And it's a little bit off here. Let's see. If I zero this out. Yeah, it's in a different angle. So what we're going to do is we're going to parent this to the light. So it's underneath the light and always follows the light. Even though this is geometry that might belong in the objects, we're going to just put it underneath the light. And this is a hard parenting, not a parent constraining. So you can middle mouse click this guy and drag it over the area light, and it's going to drop it inside just the way the area light's in the group. And now its new world position, now that it's underneath this object, its zero is the center of this object, wherever its pivot point is. So we're going to click this plane, and we're basically, which it already is, and we're going to zero everything out. And you see now it's on the plane of the area light at 0, and we're just going to rotate it, and it should, at 90 degrees, be perfectly aligned with it. Yeah, it's right perfect at 90 degrees X. And we got to put it behind it, and there it is. I'm using the move tool, but it's at world. So I have to hit the W and left click, and we'll change that to object, and now it's lined up with the light. We'll move this just behind it, and we'll scale it up so it's about the same size as the light. There we go. Middle mouse drag, go to this material here, assign new material, Lambert, and we'll just call this light card. And we'll turn the diffuse down and the incandescence up. And now that should be visible in the scene by the reflections. So we'll have some highlights, not just the diffuse lighting, but you'll actually see the light component itself in the reflection of the Phong shaders. There we go. Kind of see it. It's kind of here. It's kind of here. It'll appear better when we get there. All right, I like this. This scene's turned out pretty cool. It's pretty dark in the darks, which will add an ambient light here. But let's churn up the quality. So let's go to the render settings. No longer -4 by -3. Let's go -1 by 1. Let's see how nice that turns out. It'll take a little bit longer, so I'll fast forward the video so you don't have to wait. No, it's not taking too long actually. That was a big cut. So you can see now, even with that, I haven't changed any other settings in Mental Ray. This is pretty clean. -1 to 1 is making a very clean anti-aliased edge. It's taking a little bit longer, but this little O2 is cooking it up pretty good. I gotta say, I'm impressed. Slows down at the reflections a little bit, but not too bad. Blowing out the color a little bit. I could probably take the brightness down a little bit, or raise the light a little bit higher, because it is a little bit hot in some spots there. It flattens the smoothness out a little bit. The red one is right in the right amount of light. Like it's not blown out. It seems a little dark on that side, but I could raise it up a little bit. All right, that wasn't too long. All right, so all we have left now. We have these dark shadows. I'm gonna lift the light up a little bit again. Raise this up. I'm gonna kind of put it a little bit more over the items. Angle a little bit more. Turn the snap rotate here. A little bit more. And turn this down like what? 45 to 35. Maybe I'll scale this up slightly. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add an ambient light to get some, get rid of those blacks, complete blacks in the shadow. So create lights, ambient light, probably going to be in too bright. I don't think this initial ambience is too bright. So just to test, I'm going to turn my sample levels back. -4, -3. Just toss a render at it really quick because I want to see. I think this default ambient light is way too gray. I think its brightness is at a ridiculous level here. So let's see what it throws at us. Yeah. It's a little bit too much. It's definitely overdone. So we gotta turn that down. Yeah, it's cooked the whole lighting completely. So we'll go back here. Let's turn this intensity. Let's try let's see, 0.05. Turn that down a bit. I'm just trying to give it just enough to lift the blacks, like as if there's simulating GI. You can actually use GI here on in Mental Ray. We could turn on the final gather and the global illumination, but I have to. That's a little bit of its own tutorial to show you how to use those two properly together. If you just switch them on, it makes a little bit of a mess and it takes a long time. And there's a way to connect them to each other, so one informs the other. One puts photons out in the scene, and the final gather goes through and cleans them up and averages them. And that process is a lot faster to render and is a better quality. And that looks pretty good. Yeah, it's just giving us a little jump in the shadows here. Probably kind of hard to tell with the camera, but that'll be good. So I'll go back, and this will be our final render here. We'll go back. I guess I could show you how to do high and low. What's interesting is you can save these presets. You can save your own here. So see, I've got this Mental Ray one already saved from a previous session. You could do high or low settings, just set them here. One of the things I like to do is just save all the stats that I want in one group of Mel scripts, and middle mouse drag that as low, and then save another group of stats as high, and then I'll save all those named out attributes being set, and then middle mouse drag that as a higher, like a low setting and a high setting, and I can just click one button or two, like preview, final, preview, final. But then you can do it here by saving a preset and loading a preset too. You can go high and low there. So, and then they have their own like preview and production stuff they've done here, but I like my own settings. But let's put this back here. Let's do a -1. A high setting is like 0 to 2, but I'll just do -1 to 1. Seems to do the trick. And just see how this turns out. this ambient light. I'm moving the ambient light up here into the lights so it's in the right area. And we're going to move this up a little bit intensity. I'll put this up to like 0.085, excuse me. And then, let's see this guy, move him up a little bit more. 310, I'll do 305. All right, try again. Alright, there it is. There's our final render. Maybe a little bright on the ambient, but still a pretty render. And that's it for the first Maya tutorial, the Uber Maya tutorial, now 2 hours long. I don't know how much I'll keep in the edit, but just throw it up there, see if it's useful to anybody. Thanks for watching.